All right, old school NBA fans, self-research, NBA facts. Got another video for you. As always, thanks to anybody who watches my videos, subscribes to my channel. I really appreciate it. In this video here, I ran across a clip of Mike Greenberg talking to Jay Billis. And he can't understand why people think that another era was better than another one. Greenberg says, oh, this era is definitely more skilled. The one thing he said that made any sense at all, and I'll play the clip for you, was that, yeah, they have better access to nutrition and advancements in all that kind of stuff, supplements, training, no doubt about it. So that is going to probably make them a little quicker, maybe jump higher. Supposedly stamina, but for some reason these guys can't play 48 minutes and they get injured like crazy. Don't really see how any of this stuff is helping them prevent injuries, but here's the clip so you can see the context.
But this idea that somehow today's player would not be dominant back in the 80s or 90s because they could hand check back then or the game was different, I find that ludicrous. The idea that LeBron, Durant, Kawhi, Giannis, Doncic, Harden, Westbrook, Curry, you name it, Klay Thompson, they wouldn't be dominant back then. They might not have beaten Jordan's Bulls. Jordan and Pippen, those guys, they beat, I think it was 7 teams. They eliminated 7 teams that had won 60 or more games. They were great. But I don't ever hear any of these, similarly old men like me saying that, wait a minute now, the players of the 80s or 90s, they would have really struggled against the players of the 60s. I kind of wonder when this precipitous decline of skill and toughness started. Did it start in 99? Because I don't buy this. I think the players today are better than ever, and we do this only in basketball.
I completely agree with you. The players of today are more skilled than ever before, and they avail themselves of things that are available to them today in the areas of technology and medicine and things like that, and that would make them greater athletes.
So there you go. They're clearly saying that, oh yeah, today's athlete, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to compare the 80s and 90s to the 60s or what happened in the 60s to the 1930s. I'm sure in 30 years from now, they're going to be some kind of super athlete and all this stuff. That's not at all what people are saying. The point is missed when people are saying about the 80s and 90s were better and the players were better. They're not necessarily saying that they had better athleticism or they were stronger or faster or could jump higher. And the skill thing is absolutely debatable. If you're talking about dribbling while carrying, sure, these guys get away with it. If you're talking about shooting uncontested shots, sure, no doubt about it. They shot better uncontested shots than years past. Okay, no problem at all. But when you look at the actual quality of the players in each era, you cannot say that this era is better. The 2020s is not over yet, so I don't even bother with that. But I went decade by decade, and all I did was I took every player who finished top 5 for MVP of the entire decade, and you see for yourself, if you think that the 2010s, that's the most recent complete decade, stands above all the rest of the decades with the best players, there's no way. There is no way. Here we go. The 1950s, they only had MVP for 4 seasons, so obviously it's going to be a shorter list. But you look at some of these players on here. Bob Pettit, he's in my top 20. He was 4 times top 5 for MVP. He won the MVP twice. You got Paul Arizin. That guy would have won a finals MVP. He once led the league in field goal percentage as a small forward. Not an easy thing to do. Bob Cousy, he won an MVP. He was top 5 in 3 out of the 4 seasons. And then you got other top 75 players like Dolph Schayes, Bill Sharman, of course, Bill Russell, my number 2, Elgin Baylor down there. There's some really high quality players. Now, there is Mel Hutchins, who's not in the Hall of Fame, but George Yardley and Maurice Stokes are in the Hall of Fame, even though they were not top 75 players. Maurice Stokes only played 4 seasons. They were as great as they were because of his illness. Now look at the 1960s. Every player who finished top 5 for MVP was a top 75 player. And yes, a lot of that is going to be due to the fact that there was only between 8 and 12 teams for the course of the entire decade. Exactly. So when you only play 8 teams, you're going to play one of these guys. It wasn't so easy. That's my whole point. When you give players whatever the modern advancements are, they're going to be just as good as far as athleticism and skill level, all that stuff, going to be the same. But the things that are different is work ethic, heart, all those kind of things are going to be different. And a lot of people question this era's work ethic. And in general, I think there is some truth to it. Guys sitting out and all that kind of thing. And one thing that Jay Billis said that I don't think was in the clip that I had, but he said that, oh no, I don't think players are less competitive. Like, are you kidding? What have you been watching? You think Joel Embiid is just as competitive as John Stockton was? Really? Are you serious? You think Ben Simmons was just as competitive as a player like a Larry Bird or a Bill Russell? What planet are you living on, Jay Billis? I know that you deal with young guys now and you don't want to bash their era and all that, but it isn't about if we thought players from this era are better than the players 30 years ago. Yeah, the athleticism and all that stuff, sure, it's going to get better, just like in 30 years from now. This era is going to seem dated when it comes to athleticism, no doubt about it. But as far as like the fundamentals go, oh, it's much better back in the day. There are no fundamentals. And the whole skill thing, I can't get on board with that, because what skill are you talking about? Are you talking about the skill of boxing out, making a proper chest pass, those kind of things? Like, who's the great passers? I'm not talking about guys with assist numbers. I just mean a guy who's an unbelievably great passer. Not a lot. There was way more back in the day. That skill absolutely was better back then. One-on-one defense, on-ball defenders definitely were better back in the day. Rim protectors absolutely were better back in the day. So it just depends on what skill you're talking about. But as a whole, going decade by decade, looking at all the top 5 for MVPs of the entire decade, you're telling me the 2010s outshines every decade? Please. 1960s, Bill Russell got 9 top 5 for MVPs, won 4. Will Chamberlain had 8, 4 MVPs. Oscar Robertson had 8, 1 MVP. Elgin Baylor had 6, Jerry West 5, Bob Pettit 4, Sam Jones 2, and then a bunch of ones in here. Every player is a top 75 player, though. Wes Unseld won an MVP as a rookie. These are some great, great players. Again, it comes down to the less team thing. You play 8 teams, just like if they contracted the NBA down to 8 teams right now, this is what it would look like. It would be all-star level players. That's what it would be. Even with the influx of all the European players and all that, you've seen a drop-off in the white American player, though, which used to be very prevalent in the NBA, all the way up into the early 2000s, and then they just started dropping off for whatever reason. I don't care the reason, but yeah, the Europeans supplemented that, absolutely. 1970s, which a lot of people crap on the 70s. Heard LeBron James, oh, Giannis would score 250 points in a game if he was playing in the 70s. What a dope. Here's who the 70s had. Here's all their top 5 for MVPs. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar finished top 5 in all 10 seasons. 5 MVPs. Now, of course, it's important to remember the ABA was going on at the same time, and I'm going to get the ABA in just a moment. Dave Cowens, the second most top 5s in the 70s with 4. He won 1 MVP. Bob McAdoo had 3. He won an MVP. Jerry West had 3. Elvin Hayes had 3. A bunch of guys with 2, including John Havlicek, Bill Walton, George Gervin, Rick Barry, Willis Reed, Will Chamberlain, Bob Lanier. These are great, great players, all top 75 players. Bill Walton won an MVP. Willis Reed won an MVP. And then there's a bunch of guys who only had 1, but they're almost all top 75 players, with the exception of Connie Hawkins. The blue on the no indicates still made the Hall of Fame, though. Connie Hawkins, Spencer Haywood, David Thompson, Walter Davis, and Bob Dandridge, all in the Hall of Fame. Moses Malone won an MVP as well in 1979. Now, I included the ABA because I wanted to show all the players in the 70s were in the Hall of Fame. Even with all that, the ABA, which did affect the very late 60s, a player like a Mel Daniels, if you can win MVP in the ABA, you're going to be at least an all-star in the NBA, if not all NBA. Mel Daniels, 4 top 5s in the course of the ABA's history. I just did the whole thing because it was 9 years. He won 2 MVPs. Julius Erving had 4 also, 3 MVPs. Artis Gilmore had 3 top 5s, 1 MVP. You got Rick Barry with 3. And there is several guys in here, that did not make the Hall of Fame. Absolutely. But look at the guys who did. Connie Hawkins, Zelmo Beatty, Bobby Jones, Dan Issel, George McGinnis, Roger Brown. I don't know if you guys know much about him, but pretty good player. He played more like in the early mid-70s. David Thompson, Spencer Haywood, who was also on the NBA's top 5. He was both. Charlie Scott. All those guys right there in the Hall of Fame. But yeah, there is several guys that didn't make the Hall of Fame who played in the ABA, sure. Because, it's going to be watered down. You got 30, 32 teams or whatever it is for a league that just started. Yeah, that ABA was a little watered down. The numbers were inflated by the stars and whatnot. But that didn't mean that they didn't come to the NBA and do great. Artis Gilmore, Dr. J, Dan Issel, David Thompson, Bobby Jones, George Gervin, Moses Malone, all these guys were still high-level players in the NBA. George McGinnis. I mean, there was a plethora of very, very good players in the ABA. Moving to the 1980s. Obviously, this is, some people call the strongest decade, and there's a lot of evidence to say that. Larry Bird had 9 top 5s, won 3 MVPs. Magic Johnson, 7, won 2 MVPs. Kareem had 5, 1 MVP. Moses Malone had 4 with 2 MVPs. Dr. J had 4 with 1 MVP. Michael Jordan had 3 with 1 MVP. Then you got George Gervin, Dominique Wilkins, and Hakeem Olajuwon all had 2. Every one of these guys is top 75. And then you have Isaiah Thomas. You got Kevin McHale, Charles Barkley, Clyde Drexler, Karl Malone, Patrick Ewing. They all in there. Bernard King, Sidney Moncrief, they're in the Hall of Fame. Dennis Johnson's in the Hall of Fame. Dan Roundfield, Gus Williams, Terry Cummings. Those 3 guys were not in the Hall of Fame. But as a whole, the 80s was quite strong. You just heard all those players. How about the 1990s? People want to crap on the 90s? Look at the players who were top 5 for MVP. You're telling me this is a bad list of players? You got to be kidding me. Karl Malone had 7 top 5s for MVP. He won 2 MVPs. Michael Jordan had 7, won 4 MVPs. Patrick Ewing, 5 top 5s. David Robinson, 5 top 5s with an MVP. Hakeem Olajuwon, 4 top 5s with an MVP. Shaq had 3. Charles Barkley had 3 with an MVP. Scottie Pippen had 2. Magic Johnson had 2 in the 2 years that he even played in the 90s with an MVP. Tim Duncan had 2 in the 2 years he played in the 90s. Then you got Dominique Wilkins, Tim Hardaway, Grant Hill, Penny Hardaway, Glenn Rice, Gary Payton, Alonzo Mourning, Allen Iverson, and Jason Kidd. The only players who were not top 75 in the 90s who finished top 5 was Tim Hardaway, Hall of Famer, Grant Hill, Hall of Famer, Alonzo Mourning, Hall of Famer. So you got Glenn Rice and Penny Hardaway who weren't. And we all know that Penny Hardaway was absolutely on his way to the Hall of Fame, but injuries derailed his career. No one is going to argue that, anybody with any sense. And you got Glenn Rice, who was probably the worst player to make a top 5 for MVP of the entire decade, and Glenn Rice was still a nice player. I wouldn't say he was Hall of Fame, but he was still a very solid player, no doubt. And this doesn't include all the other great players in the 90s who didn't make top 5, like Mitch Richmond, Chris Mullin, Sean Kemp. There's a bunch of them that weren't even named in here. Several. Dennis Rodman, Joe Dumars, Isaiah Thomas. There's several. Larry Bird played 3 years in the 90s. He didn't make top 5 for MVP. Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, a bunch of them. Mark Price, Brad Daugherty, Kevin Johnson. I could go all day with this stuff. But what I'm saying is, the 90s seemed weak to you? Not at all to me. The 2000s, like the 90s, there's 2 guys at the top who had 7 for the decade, Tim Duncan and Kobe Bryant. Duncan won 2 MVPs, Kobe won 1. Shaq had 5 with 1 MVP. Garnett had 5 with 1 MVP. LeBron James 4 with 1 MVP. Dirk Nowitzki had 3 with 1 MVP. Steve Nash had 3 with 2 MVPs. Allen Iverson had 2 with 1 MVP. And I always thought, look, Steve Nash is a great shooter, a very good passer, no doubt about it. He was not a good defender at all. But I always thought that Steve Nash winning those 2 MVPs kind of brought the 2000s down a little bit, the quality, just a little bit. Not that Nash was bad, no, nothing like that. But I mean, you look at the 90s, look at the players who won the MVPs. Karl Malone, Michael Jordan, David Robinson, Hakeem Olajuwon, Charles Barkley, and Magic Johnson. That's who won the MVPs. Nash is just not on that level. Those guys are all top 30 all-time players. Nash just isn't. But anyway, that's just my opinion, whatever. Allen Iverson had 2 top 5s, and he had 1 MVP. He did have 1 top 5 in the 90s. Chris Paul had 2, McGrady had 2, Dwight Howard had 2. And then you got players like Kidd, Billups, Webber, Mourning, Jermaine O'Neal, Peja Stojakovic, and even Karl Malone got 1 in the year 2000. But all the players that are top 75, as you can see, except for Tracy McGrady, probably would have been and maybe even should have been. Definitely injuries derailed him. Dwight Howard, a lot of people feel like he probably should have been in there. I would say both those guys are top 80 players, if not top 75. You look at a guy like Chauncey Billups. He's a Hall of Famer, but his case is not very strong at all. Chris Webber's in the Hall of Fame. I mean, I guess that's pretty legitimate. Alonzo Mourning, a guy who played most of his career in the 90s, could never make anything. All NBA, all defense, defensive player of the year. None of that until all the old centers, Ewing, Robinson, Olajuwon, they aged out. Then Mourning seized the opportunity and he got all those awards. But I think that players like Jermaine O'Neal, Peja Stojakovic, they were good, and then of course Karl Malone, Dwayne Wade's in there, Kidd's in there. I'm just saying, like, the 2000s and the 90s is very close. And I think the 80s is close too. Maybe just a hair better than the 90s and 2000s as far as quality of the top players. But it's close. The 90s being watered down did nothing. Believe me, the top players in the 90s are just as good as the 2000s, if not even a little better. That's my opinion. Now we got the 2010s. And you tell me. LeBron James had 9 top 5s for MVP. So obviously he's the best player of the decade according to the voters for MVP. He won 3 MVPs. Kevin Durant had 6 top 5s. He won an MVP. Kawhi Leonard's got 2. Chris Paul's got 2. Steph Curry's got 3 top 5s. He won an MVP. James Harden has 5 top 5s. He won an MVP, which I don't think James Harden is going to win one in the 80s and 90s. I just don't see it. Russell Westbrook had 4 top 5s, 1 MVP, which I, again, don't see that at all. Kobe had 4, even in the 2010s, which is crazy to me. Would have been 2010 through 2013. Dwight Howard had 2, Anthony Davis 2, and all the rest of these guys had 1. Derrick Rose, an MVP, and he only had 1 top 5. Obviously, like Penny Hardaway, Derrick Rose got derailed by injuries. But when you look under the hood at some of these non-top 75 players, Isaiah Thomas, what do you have, like 1-2 years that he was really good? I mean, okay, I guess. Tony Parker, nice player. He's in the Hall of Fame. Blake Griffin, Joakim Noah, Paul George. Yeah, I don't think so. These guys right here are at the bottom. Giannis and Jokic are really young in this decade or whatnot. And Giannis won that MVP in 2019. I didn't have it marked on there, but that was the 10th MVP was Giannis. And obviously, yeah, he's a great player. He's in my top 25. I think I got number 24 all time. Sure, very good player, outstanding player, no doubt about it. Had a little problem winning even with a great team. But either way, Giannis definitely is a great player. At that time, though, he was very, very early on, Giannis, not until the 2020s. But I don't think the 2020s is better than the 2010s. It's about the same. Do I think that Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jason Tatum, and Giannis, are those 5 better than the guys I said, Curry, Durant, Harden, Westbrook, and LeBron? About the same to me. But even the players at the top, you're telling me with a straight face that the guys who had the most top 5s for MVP, Russell Westbrook, Kobe, but he was older Kobe, but even still, include Kobe in there. Russell Westbrook, Kobe Bryant, James Harden, Kevin Durant, and LeBron James. You're telling me that those guys were better, not as good, better than Karl Malone, Michael Jordan, Patrick Ewing, David Robinson, and Hakeem Olajuwon? Is that your contention? Okay, if you think so. Of the 2000s, you got Kobe going against Kobe, but Tim Duncan, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, Kevin Garnett, and I guess it'd be LeBron again going against himself because he actually had the fifth most of the 2000s also. Yeah, I don't think so. The 1980s, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Moses Malone, and Dr. J. All five of those guys are in my top 15. Yeah, I don't think so. 70s, maybe, maybe not. It gets confusing because of the ABA. But I would say the 2010s, only the 70s and maybe the 50s. The 60s, you got Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, Oscar Robertson, Elgin Baylor, and Jerry West. That's pretty tough to beat right there. Bob Pettit coming in sixth. I mean, those are some great players. So all my point is to all this is there's no way the 2010s are the best decade we've ever seen. They did that video clip in 2019. So that would have been that decade because that's what he was talking about. You guys tell me in the comments, do you think the 2010s was the strongest decade we've seen? I thought as a whole it was weak, the weakest one that I've seen in my lifetime. I didn't get to see the 70s or before. But the middle 2010s, really weak. As soon as the players like Dirk Nowitzki, Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Tim Duncan, Kobe, when they all aged out and they were done, and we were left with Harden, Westbrook, Curry, Durant, LeBron, like that's the best players. I just thought that was the weakest era. That's just my opinion, though. You guys are all entitled to your own. Defensively, it took a huge step backwards. And again, that's my opinion, of course, but that's when the defense really crapped the bed, in my opinion. So anyway, let me know in the comments, which era do you think had the best superstars? Which one had the worst superstars of the players I just gave you? Let me know. Anyway, that's all I got for this video. Thank you guys for watching. If you liked it, please hit the like button. If you wouldn't mind sharing it, that would be great. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. I give daily content. And that's it. Until next time.